Hello everybody and welcome to Chit-Chat Tuesday on exploring the afterlife, and tonight we're also linked in with my own YouTube channel, so it's going on exploring the afterlife and Paul Goddard. So wherever you're watching, hello to you, and I'm just going to make sure that I share this video out so we get as many people watching as we can, because it's always I always look forward to these chit chats every single Tuesday. So let's share this out now, which is just going perfect. So hello everybody, and I'm really delighted to introduce Boxtail Soup. We have Noel and Antonia, and I'm a massive M.R. James fan, and I was lucky enough to see the version that Boxtail Soup put together of Casting the Runes, and I absolutely love that M.R. James story. And other adaptations I was slightly less pleased with, but this particular version by Boxtail Soup was just absolutely brilliant. It just really brought to life the M.R. James story. And what I really love about Boxtail Soup is that they go around, they involve puppetry, there's music, there's often as well with the Gulliver, there's like some sea shanties, I have to be careful how I say that, thrown into the mix. Really truly imaginative, and that's why it's called Boxtail Soup, because literally they go around with a trunk, and all the props, all sceneries, good crafted handmade props and sceneries and puppetry that get brought out, and it's a great show for using your imagination and bringing things to life. So I'm really absolutely delighted to introduce both Noel and Antonia tonight. It's an hour show tonight, so do get your questions in, and I've also got some clips lined up of some trailers and a couple of bits and pieces that Boxtail Soup have done to show you. Must say hello to Patricia, Lorna, and there's more people watching, but do come on, do say hello, be lovely. So thank you so much for joining tonight. Is there anything from that introduction that you feel that would be beneficial to add?
No, I don't think so. I think that was pretty accurate.
Yep, good. That's absolutely good. So yeah, what I want to know is that when I have watched your sales before, it's incredibly interesting. It's incredibly imaginative. You get a lot of theatre companies that tour. You get a lot of theatre companies that are just either one-man shows as well, or a small group of people. But it's the first time I've properly seen like puppetry and also yourselves acting with it as well. And when I first saw it, it was just the two of you, but there's a few more people that have come into the theatre company and act along with you as well. Where did that initial idea originally come from to actually do like involving the puppetry as well? And were there any influences, or was it just something that you thought, we're just going to go ahead and do this?
I think so. We decided, I think we had a conversation first back in 2012, I think it was, and I was having it together. And Noel has done a lot of street theatre and still does it occasionally, not so often anymore, mostly only in Edinburgh. But his street show used to use a little leather suitcase for all of the show, and the show would come out of that. And we had this chat, and I was like, oh, what about if we made a full theatre show but out of a slightly larger suitcase? So that was how the very first idea of the company started. And then the puppetry evolved. We decided that we were going to make a version of Jane Austen's Northanger Abbey. It has quite a lot of sort of gothic-y horror in it, sort of influences like that. Catherine Morland reads novels. She reads The Mysteries of Udolpho, so there's a lot of sort of gothic elements to it. And there was one character in particular, General Tilney, who is the father of her love interest in the book. And it struck us that he would make an excellent puppet. And we were imagining this sort of slightly larger than life character almost like the character of her imagination rather than the real General Tilney. So we thought he would be a good puppet.
I think in the very beginning we talked about him being a shadow puppet.
That's right.
So he would just be seen as a silhouette at the back, and then that idea evolved from there, really.
And then one day there were a couple of other characters in the book that they're quite caricatured, some of the more incidental characters. And we thought, well, maybe they would make good puppets. So we tried to make some. Both Noel and I are kind of interested in creative things like that as well as performing. We've always been interested in who did art, at school, and I did sets and costume design when I was at university. So we just had a craft day. It was a bit like Blue Peter in our living room. We blew up some balloons and covered them in paper mache and tried to make puppet heads. And they were quite successful. There was something sort of charming about them. And then as the time grew on, when we were working on that show, it became clear that it would make sense that the love interests were the only humans in the show, and the rest of the cast should be puppets, so that it sort of highlighted their human connection. And that's sort of how it evolved, I think.
Yeah, it just then all seemed to fall into place. Then it made sense in the world of the story. It made sense to have these characters be puppets. And as nervous as we were when we first showed that performance to anyone, because we hadn't really worked with puppets before, we hadn't made puppets before, we didn't really know whether people were going to have a positive reaction or not. But people were so engaged by them and seemed to like them so much that was exactly the boost we needed to go, this could work.
Amazing. I think what I will do, I'll just say hello to Sue and Cowabunga. Hello to you that have joined in as well. I've got, Annie, hello to you. Just says hello to us both Boxtail Soup and myself. I'm just going to play a little clip of Northanger Abbey, because it'd be nice to show what it's like. It's one of your early trailers, but it'd be great to see it. And I do like it's very atmospheric.
Mm-hmm.
You formed a very favourable idea of the Abbey.
To be sure I have. Is it not a fine old place, just like what one reads about?
But are you prepared for all the horrors that a place such as what one reads about may produce?
Oh, I would not tell you what is behind the black veil for all the world. Are you not wild to know?
Yes, quite. What can it be?
We would like you to join us at our family home, Northanger Abbey.
Northanger Abbey.
Eleanor was away from home at the time, and at such a distance as to return only to find her mother in a coffin. It was no wonder that the General should shrink from the sight of such objects as that room must contain. A room in all probability never entered by him since the dreadful scene passed, which released his suffering wife and left him to the stings of conscience.
But this cannot happen to me, I am sure.
Fantastic stuff. So when you actually adapt a book, well, any of the books really, what's some of the first things you've done? Now, I've seen on some of your vlogs that you do drawings as well, but what's the first steps that you take to actually then bring the book to life in your unique style of theatre?
It depends on the source material to begin with, because if there's a lot of dialogue in there, then one of the first things we do is extract all of that dialogue and see how the story hangs together if you're just reading the dialogue, and see how much we would need to add or how much we'd need to. I mean, wherever possible, we try not to sort of invent stuff. So even if we have to extract from reported speech and stuff like that, or we use language that's been described or speech that's been described by the narrator in the book, if there isn't a lot of dialogue in there, but that'll kind of be the first step, wouldn't it? Taking the dialogue out of it and seeing where we stand from there. Then we would generally go through it and maybe sort of split it into episodes or into scenes so that you can see the overall of the story, because then you also get a sense of what you can and can't afford to keep. So for Northanger Abbey, for example, anybody who knows the book really well will know that there is a subplot with one of the characters. Without going into too much detail, there is a love story subplot with one of the characters that we we just felt that we couldn't really afford to keep in if we were going to have the show run in about 60, 70 minutes, which was the goal that we had for ourselves. And also bearing in mind that there's only 2 performers in it, and we also have this array of puppets, because one of the central questions is, whose story are we trying to tell? So in the case of Northanger Abbey, we were focused on Catherine Morland, and we just felt that in the time that we had available, in the space that we had available, it would be too much of a diversion then to keep this whole subplot in there. And it's tricky because obviously you're working with things that are very dear to a lot of people's hearts. So, you know, if you're having fans of the original material come and see your work, then obviously you want them to think that you've treated it with respect and that you've kept the authorial voice and you've kept the kind of essence of what makes it a good piece of work in the first place.
I think it's different when you, because that was definitely the case with the dialogue coming out. That was definitely the case for Northanger and the Picture of Dorian Gray, because Oscar Wilde, like, his dialogue is so wonderful. He wrote a lot of plays, right? So there's lots that's there to kind of already there. But then actually when it came to the M.R. James adaptation, for example, there's not anything like as much dialogue in those stories, and not least they are also short stories. So if we just stuck to casting the runes, then there would probably not quite have been enough for an hour-long show. So with that one, what we then did was we read all of the M.R. James ghost stories, and rather than invent our own material to go around it, we used other stories to fill out the adaptation. So we used bits of the mezzotint, and we used a Whistle on I Come to You reference, and we used a few little bits of other ones so that it's still basically so that we could keep it as M.R. James as possible, but expand just a little on the story that was already there. We also changed one of the characters from male to female in that, because M.R. James doesn't write a lot of women, or if he does, then
no, he doesn't.
No. So we sort of, like, for a modern audience, I think it's nice to have a woman there as well to kind of, and it wasn't a stretch. We didn't feel like by changing John, Harry, by changing him to a woman, we didn't really feel like we were taking anything away from the original character. So we don't like to ever overlay another thing on top of a book. We like to the book as it is in its essence, rather than give it any sort of, we don't ever add any framing. We use what's there or what the other material the author has written in order to frame it.
I think in the M.R. James adaptation, which worked well for me as well, because I did notice the elements from some of the M.R. James books, and just a little bit of Night of the Demon was in there as well. Am I right in thinking?
There's a few Easter eggs in there as well for people who really know the stuff. Yeah, there's a few little bits and pieces that we dotted throughout.
Like a wink and a nod.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. A nod to this thing like that.
Yeah, without hopefully not giving too much away, but it's kind of like a thriller ghost story, and the amount of time given is for the person to, how can I say this without totally giving it away for people who don't know the story, because it is great just to go completely cold but into it. But one of the things, it's like so many months and it goes down to so many days that you have to do. And I think that keeps the pace up really nicely for the live performance. I will show a clip of that shortly. Moira says she wants to see Northanger Abbey now. I must say hello to Soldier, Cowabunga, Wendy. I think there's a few more people have come. If I missed anybody's comments, then I do apologise. But yeah, I will actually play a bit of the M.R. James story, and you know, particularly on my channel, people like M.R. James. Please say I have got it loaded up, so that's good.
As you'll all be aware, I have debunked and exposed many so-called psychics, mediums and sorcerers. It's very rare that I find anything of any real interest. However, earlier today I believe I found just such a thing.
sworn I saw
I came here alone.
when suddenly he starts behaving most unusually. Paranoid, short-tempered, complaining to the police about being followed. Not long afterwards, he's found dead.
I
We went in a while.
Yeah.
trust me to slightly spoil the atmospheric ending there. Annie says, is or where we can get the book or watch it. If we're talking about the M.R. James, then I highly recommend that you go on Boxtail Soup. There is a link in the description to their audio dramas, because there were 3 audio dramas that Boxtail Soup put together during the lockdown period. So as that's on there, we had a little chat about those audio dramas at the beginning, just before we went live. But this came about because of lockdown, having shows that you were planning on doing, and then all of a sudden all the theatres were shut. So it must have been a hard time for anybody in the acting world. I got a friend who's an actor, and he also found it very difficult during that time. So if you can sort of say how that came about, the audio dramas, and what specifically was it that made you choose these stories, and you also some of the things that you did to create that magic in an audio fashion.
Well, I think we were really conscious, and it's funny looking back at those trailers now. Obviously at the time we didn't have as much experience, and we were a smaller company, and you're always limited for resources. So looking back at those trailers, it's just kind of funny to look back at them now and think, gosh, they were of their time. So the reason I say that is because when we came into the lockdown, obviously we saw that there were a lot of companies putting work up online and making it available to watch, and possibly trying to earn a little money that way, or whatever it might have been. We didn't feel that we had anything of a high enough quality, basically, to be able to offer online that would be a decent experience, because we didn't want to put something online for the sake of it, and we didn't want people to watch something and feel like it was a lesser experience than going to see the show in person. So after we'd made the decision not to put any video up there, we were thinking of other things that we could do, and we like to listen to a lot of audio dramas and a lot of audio books, and when we're making stuff in the studio and when we're creating puppets and things, it's a great way to be able to to have some entertainment and to have stuff to listen to like that. And we are often impressed by the amount of atmosphere and the world that you can create just with that soundscape, or just with a voice, or just with this the description and the accents that some of the brilliant audiobook narrators do. We had a contact, a guy called John Wood, who was a guy who'd been to see quite a few of our shows, and I think it's fair to describe him as a fan. I think he'd describe himself as a fan. And he used to be a professional sound editor, and he worked with Foley engineer and all these kind of things. So he'd always said to us, if we ever needed any help with anything like that, we should get in touch. This seemed like the perfect moment to do that.
I think it's safe to say that it was Casting the Rooms, which was the first one we tried to do, and we didn't ask for his help very soon, as in we asked for it after we'd already we put something together first, and then we sent it over to him and said, what do you think? And he helped us kind of just tweak a few bits. So with that one, it was very much us in our studio with a kind of blanket over our heads to try and dull the echo, and then doing things like to make sound effects, literally recording me with a pair of heels on walking across the floor, or us bang against the wall of the studio, so much so that our neighbors thought we'd got locked in. It was that. very sort of raw, amateur in a way, like version of putting things together. But then once we'd done that, we were very pleased that we felt like we did actually then manage to make something which we were happy with, which actually did sound like the kind of thing that you might listen to on Radio 4 or whatever. Maybe not quite as good microphone quality, but not bad. And
in that sense, it was a good learning experience.
It really was,
wasn't it?
yeah.
Necessity really is the mother of invention, and we learned a lot about audio production, a lot about using the software and putting those things together, which will continue to be useful.
Yeah,
has been useful since, which is always good.
Yeah, and when I have seen little documentaries on Radio 4 and the sound effects, I mean, it is all sorts of things like banging on doors and using all sorts of wonderful things. I mean, the Archers use like yogurt pots for some of their sounds and things like that. So Soldier asks, hello to Marie as well. Soldier asks, how badly did COVID damage your productions? Well, it basically stopped it. Was it just put on hold, or do you have to basically scrap some ideas?
It wasn't great. I mean, we did our final show, which we didn't realize it was going to be that, but on the 6th of March 2020, and then from then on, we just got cancellation email after cancellation email. So we had a full year planned. We had the rest of the what?
Well, I was just going to say, I'm laughing because that last show that we did.
Oh, we got COVID.
There were 3 of us in the show. There was a woman coughing heavily in the front row, and the 3 of us got COVID a few days out.
Although we didn't realise it was that time, but subsequently we all lost our sense of taste and smell and everything. And we were like, this is really weird. Anyway, so yeah. But anyway, we were fine. So that was a happy COVID story, not a sad one in that sense. But so we had a full year planned. We had the rest of the tour planned. We had Edinburgh planned. We had a whole Christmas run. So everything literally just suddenly kind of, we had no work. We were lucky because we just received an Arts Council grant development work on Gulliver's Travels,
which was the first time we've had a grant.
Yeah, so we at least had that, which we could in some form continue with. So we sort of spent time continue to work on that, and then basically, luckily for us in a way, because of the way we set a company up, as in the shows are compact, a lot of them only require Noel and I, or another performer at the most. We, as soon as there were live performances happening, even though they were outdoors, we were able to literally pick up a box and go off and do a show. So as soon as people could asked us, whether could we do a show next week, we were in the fortunate position where we could say, yes, what do you want? We have something we can offer you. So that was very helpful. We did actually end up doing some Christmas shows in 2020. We did 6 performances of A Christmas Carol in the main house in Cheltenham. Which was amazing. I mean, it was amazing to get some shows done. But it was, so the answer to the question is a lot in some ways, and in some ways we were fortunate because of the way we work, and we were able to get back out there as quickly as possible. So the tricky thing now is getting the audiences back. We've definitely noticed a big difference. Where in 2019 we were we'd reached a bit of a peak, hadn't we? Everything was selling out. And that's been the frustrating thing. Coming back this year to touring, the drop off in audiences is very, very noticeable for all sorts of reasons. I don't think that's just COVID. I think it's a lot of things. But so in fact, in a funny sort of way, it's almost more frustrating now getting back, but it not actually being back to how it was, and feeling like we've gone back a few years and we've now got to kind of climb back to where we were.
Yeah, I mean, that's understandable. And I also do think as well that there are a lot of people that would enjoy live shows, and for one thing or another, maybe somebody who's quite immune compromised, that I think there's still a little bit of fear going to a live show, particularly if it's going to be busy and packed. But what I wanted to sort of say is that I want to get on, I've got a little bit from one of your vlogs. This is when you went to LA doing Gulliver. And I like what you say, that you put sea shanties in as like what Gulliver had learned throughout, and how you got those words from the book and adapted it to put into sea shanties, and how that came about.
Well, I think we when we came to adapt Gulliver's Travels, every text that you come to has a different challenge. With this one, there's no dialogue in there. So for starters, you have to create that somehow. And then the other challenge is that it's very episodic, and there's not really necessarily much of a connection between those different lands. And in fact, in the original book, Gulliver goes home, and sometimes years pass between his different journeys to different places. So we wanted to make sure that when it was on stage, that it had, obviously, that it was as true as we could be to the book, but also that it had a dramatic narrative, that it had a satisfying through line for an audience, and that you felt like there was a journey from beginning to end, and it kind of had some sort of resolution at the end. We like the idea of sea shanties because obviously they're appropriate to the story, but there's also something, they're an interesting sort of form of music, really, because they're of the way that they were created and the way that they're sung, and they're often used as work songs. In some cases they have a kind of slightly mournful quality as well. They can be quite beautiful, and they often are telling stories. So we thought it would be a useful way to transition from one land to the next.
They can also be quite haunting, which was something that we were really interested in exploring. The idea of whether Gulliver really went to all those different lands, or whether he was shipwrecked and was was kind of haunted by the memories of some troublesome sea voyages that he had, or whether he went to those lands and was troubled by the things that he saw, and therefore this sort of sense of him being a slightly haunted man was something we were interested in. And the sea shanties in the show serve a kind of at least dual purpose, where they, in fact, maybe a threefold purpose, because they sort of get us from one land to the next. They also give they give this sort of strange sense of they give a different mood, don't they? They give this transitional, almost they put us into a sort of liminal space where, are we in Gulliver's head or are we in reality? We're not quite sure, and they've got this haunting quality. And then they also serve a purpose in that if you listen carefully to the lyrics, they are written to explain what Gulliver learnt from the land he's just been in.
And we try and sort of couch that in the language of a sea shanty. It's not too overt, but the sort of metaphorical message.
We referred to them as, in Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Oompa Loompa moments where they sum up what's happened. We referred to them as Oompa Loompa shanties because they have that sense. They tell us the moral of what we've just learned in a metaphorical way, don't they?
And I guess in a sense you're sort of borrowing from the musical theatre side of things, where you can actually get quite a lot of information and emotion across in a song in a relatively short space of time, that might take you longer to explain or to play out.
And what is interesting as well, I think it's the only time it happens in one of your productions, do correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a puppet of Noel involved in Gulliver. And what was it like seeing and creating a puppet of yourself? Hi, Carol.
So I made Little Gulliver, and I made he's made of white cotton fabric. It's just an old sheet, in fact, and he was made as a prototype for when we were doing research and development on the show. He was he wasn't really necessarily meant to be in the final show, but as is often the case with these sorts of things, we sort of fell in love with the little puppet. So I made him a waistcoat that is the same as Gulliver wears. But the best bit was when I got to make his hair. So we decided, obviously, if he's going to be Noel, he's got to look more like Noel. So I made his hair out of some other fabric, and I had I'm always telling the story, poor Noel. I had different colours of fabric laid out, and I was like, well, which one? And I was kind of holding them up, looking at Noel. And one of the ones I had was this greyish tone. There's different kinds of grey. And then there was a more black one with a more brown one, and I was like, I'm sorry, no, but it's got to be the grey one. So I put the grey one on, and I was like, see, it looks like you, and he was slightly offended that I made it. But I like it. It's got to have those nice flecks of
I had to face reality, especially now that everybody tells me how much it looks like me. So
yes.
I have to accept.
It's all right. I'm going more grey now, so it's fine. I know what that's like. I've got a clip.
Very trendy.
Yeah, absolutely. And people are actually paying good money in hairdressers to
exactly.
put grey in their hair now. So yeah.
Exactly.
I've got here a little bit from when you were in LA. I thought it'd just be nice to show because it shows a little bit of Gulliver being performed. And also as well, I really like this venue you're in, so I'll just play that now.
Let me give some account of myself. A young man. There was not much to tell before my voyage began. The third of 5 sons who set off to learn, to study a trade, a living to earn. Navigation, mathematics, and medicine too. All useful for travel, and it's this that's been true. I believed it was one day my fortune to do. To set forth to sea with a ship and a crew, and we'll travel on, we'll travel on, we'll travel on together.
I must say hello to Charles, who's just joined. Thanks for my message last night, Charles. I will respond to you after this. It was quite late last time I got that, but I will respond. What an amazing venue that is, and one of the things I wanted to sort of point out, and I'll see Soldier's message and read that out after. But I believe for going to LA, you had to recreate the oars because you couldn't take them with you, and did that cause any panic at all? Was it like, no, this is going to be fine?
We'd actually planned that a very long way ahead, in fact, because we always knew that this show, because the show was actually commissioned by the library there, so we always knew that the intention was to take it over to LA and perform it there at some point. Our shows tend to be very portable anyway, because we're always conscious that if they're going to tour, that they have to be able to pack down and be practical in that sense. But yeah, for the oars, we were just aware from the very beginning, when we were creating the show, the way that we were using them, we knew that we couldn't really break them in half. We couldn't have them fold because they wouldn't be strong enough to do the other jobs that they had to do in the show. And we had a little conversation about it one day, and we kind of came to the conclusion that given that we were going to be in LA, we weren't in the middle of the wilderness. We figured we'd probably be able to find a broom handle at the very least. We couldn't find anything better than that. It did make for a little adventure when we got out.
And the only problem with them was we didn't account for the fact that the ones we found over there, which were broom handles, but they were actually quite heavy. So they were much heavier than the ones we've been using here. And you can see it slightly actually when the camera pans like that and you see the set. The one side, the oar is quite bowed, and it's because it was too heavy.
Funnily enough, one of them was heavier than the other.
Yeah, that was the weirdest thing.
Weird,
like, one was really heavy and the other one was kind of
from the same place,
in the same rack. Yeah. Anyway.
Soldier's actually saying about yourself, Antonia. If you do voiceovers, because it says for audiobooks, because you've got a very pleasant voice. So I thought I'd say that. what Soldier just said. Okay.
There we go.
Well, before I load it up, actually, I wanted to talk about some shows coming up and where people can see it, because over Christmas you're doing both Hansel and Gretel and A Christmas Carol in Twickenham. And just kind of, if you can let people know if there's still tickets for that, and the venue that you're going to be doing those two ones in Twickenham, so people can look it up and start to book.
Yeah, so we are at the Exchange Theatre in Twickenham, which is very close to the station, actually. It's an easy walk. And we are there on the 2nd and the 3rd of December. Christmas Carol is on both of those days at 7 p.m. And there are tickets for a Christmas Carol. Hansel and Gretel, there are tickets for as well. That's on the Saturday at 3 p.m. But that's really for 3-year-olds upwards. So it's a very, very sweet show, and adults have enjoyed it. But it's sort of that's aimed at children.
Yeah, it's very silly. It's good fun.
Yeah, it's fun. But A Christmas Carol is we're very proud of that show, actually. I think partly because we had to create it during COVID time, and then we created it for a much larger space than we've ever done before because it went into the main house. It had to be just the two of us because of COVID restrictions, and we feel like it was a book that someone had suggested we do a long time ago when we first sort of created the company, and we decided at the time that we weren't ready for it, and then we felt brave enough to give it a go, and we're very, very glad we did, and we are very proud of it. So if you can come along, we would love to see you. 2nd and 3rd of December, Exchange in Twickenham. Tickets are on our website. There's a link. It's I think it's 70 minutes, so it's a nice easy watch.
Yeah.
And very Christmas.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's must say hello to Edwin from Amsterdam. It's also one of the greatest ghost stories ever told, with such a and Patricia said she loves sea shanties. I heard you talk about that it was important for you when doing the Christmas Carol. We will show a clip from the most recent trailer, and that was filmed at the Everyman Theatre, that the Cratchit family would appear in their entirety rather than just have it that the Mrs. Cratchit, Bob Cratchit were to sort of together with little Tiny Tim, that all of them kind of took part. Did that cause any problems with the logistics of movement of the characters, or how to do that, or was it all right?
I think it's often the same sort of issue that you come up against with all of the different adaptations. They all have different challenges, but in the beginning, whenever we start coming up with ideas for the show and designing the show, we try to basically never let ourselves throw an idea away. In the very beginning, we kind of say, okay, we can throw everything on the table, and we won't prejudge anything at this stage. We'll just get it all out there. And it's important then not to dismiss things on the basis that they're difficult. So just because there's only 2 of us and there's 5-6 people in the Cratchit family, we can't really dismiss it just on those grounds. It's worth experimenting and exploring. Okay, what are the ways in which we could do this? How could we have fun with this? How could we make this work? So I don't want to give it away really, just in case anybody does come to see it. But we came up with what on an initial suggestion seemed like quite a ridiculous idea, but when we tried it out and we made a couple of prototypes, it involves quite a ridiculous contraption that I have to wear. We really liked the look of it, and we liked the way it worked. It is a ghost story, and there's some darker moments in there, so it's nice to have a little bit of fun in there as well. I
think the thing that we were concerned about with the Cratchits, wasn't it, was because they are quite fun. The solution is a little bit silly, and when they first appear, it is meant to be funny and gets a really nice, warm laugh. And then our only concern with that was obviously then the second time they appear during the Ghost of Christmas Future episode. Obviously, it's very tragic, their story, and so you don't want that to be undermined by the concept of the way they appear being slightly humorous. But in fact, the beautiful thing was that it's funny, but it's not irreverent. And so when you then get to that moment, just by a simple, you do a beautiful job with the puppetry in that moment, and I think that helps. because it never we've done it so many times now, because we did it loads of times last year, and there's never even a titter the second time that they appear, because the moment is, because it's performed beautifully by you, well done, but also it isn't an irreverent representation.
No, I think you've developed a fondness for those characters because they're quite sweet. So when you see them again in this sort of tragic situation, it's quite touching.
We like those kind of challenges, I think it's safe to say. That's what make it fun. But that is one of the reasons why that sort of so many characters is one of the reasons why we didn't tackle A Christmas Carol all those years ago.
Until we felt ready.
Yeah.
Lovely. Well, it's a great little trailer. It's a great trailer, and it's slightly shorter than some of the other ones, but I really like it, so I'm going to show the trailer now.
Cool.
Just make sure I get the right one up. There we go.
Merry Christmas, sir.
Merry Christmas. Humbug!
One of the things that I have heard you talk about before is, and when I've seen your shows, that is timing is kind of very important. How do you find that? Because each stage is going to be a different size, and from rehearsing in the space you have, does that cause much challenges? And is there little tips and tricks that you get around that?
I mean, yeah, it's interesting because with that show particularly, it's quite a good example of that being a bit of an issue, because we ended up making it for the main house in Cheltenham when it was supposed to be in the studio first. And obviously, you've been in the studio, you know what it's like. And for anyone who hasn't been, the main house theatre is a standard Regency beautiful theatre. It's enormous, really. It's got a big stage, big proscenium arch. The studio is contrastly 60 seats theatre, and the stage is relatively small. It's sort of wide and narrow and not very deep, and then the audience are very close. So when we were doing it in the studio last year, we did have to rework it quite a bit, and timings were definitely different. It's funny because you'd think in some ways that things would take less time if you've got less space to walk in, if you see what I mean. If the distance is shorter, it'll take less time. But in fact, the weird thing about it is it actually often takes longer in a smaller space because you're having to negotiate each other. So it's
and the things around
and
you,
the things around you,
the set, and everything. You have to be careful.
Yeah.
Moving in a smaller space.
With that, we had the luxury of a week or so rehearsal in the space before we performed again in the studio to kind of convert from one to the other. And we're touring, we don't have that luxury. So we've just been touring with Gulliver, and we've been touring in a variety of different venues. One of them was the smallest theatre in Scotland, which is a beautiful little converted, I think it was a horse stables or something, I think. I'm not sure. Sorry, Helen and Paul, if I got that wrong. But it's a tiny stage. We just fit the show in there. And different venues, we were in the Story House in Chester, which is very wide, the Old Laundry Theatre, where it's big theatre in the Lake District, where there's audience on three sides. And you don't have any rehearsal, so you just have to figure it out when you're there. And I think you're just very good at listening to each other.
I think the more we've done shows and the more we get used to working as we do, which is very much all together all the time. In all of our shows, once we're on stage, all of the performers are on stage throughout. There's not really any off moments. I mean, even when you're not actively involved in the scene, you're present and you're usually doing something as well, because there's lots of puppets and things to be manipulated or moved around. So you get very good, I hope, at listening and being conscious of what's going on with everybody else, and just taking your time and making sure that you're aware of where somebody might need to go, or if somebody has to travel slightly further, maybe I need to buy them an extra second or two with this line. There was one moment in particular, I think it was at the Story House on the last leg of this tour, when both you and Adam, after the show, came out and went, God, there was a moment there when we realised we had a huge distance to cover,
Yeah.
because they had to get from one side of the stage to the other. It was much bigger, much wider than the spaces we're in. And basically, they both said, "Yeah, we just had to break into a run."
We just had to run. But I think that's, for an audience, we would hope that, particularly in that show, actually, there's a lot of things that need to land together. So 3 of us doing different movements, but that they all need to land at the same time. So very much about watching everyone else and thinking, right, okay, I need to run now. So both of us have thought it. We need to run so that we get there.
And I need to take my time.
Yeah.
I need to be aware that they're on their way. Give them an extra minute.
Brilliant. Must say hello to my dear friend Nanny Lynn Sindri. She's been sharing this out, so great one. Thanks Lynn. That's wonderful. Claire is watching. I want to read this one out from Soldier. It's amazing to me what you can produce with such a small group of very talented people.
Thank you very much.
I will, shortly, because it's an hour show tonight, I will pop up Hansel and Gretel, because if you have children, it's going to be a wonderful show to see. But just before we do Hansel and Gretel, could you give a mention to where people can find you, your website, social media that you're on, and anything else you want to give a plug for? Hi, Wendy.
Absolutely. So we are, our website is boxtailsoup.co.uk. You can see the spelling. I think you can see. Can they see our name? I'm assuming they can see our name.
They can see it's up there, yes.
So that's how you spell it. It's a tail, like a story, not a waggy one. And it's the same on all our social media. So on Instagram, we're at boxtailsoup. On Facebook, we're /boxtailsoup. We're on Twitter at boxtailsoup. And we are also on YouTube. You can reach our YouTube channel by going to our website, because I can't remember what the actual web
I think if you
address
search
is.
Boxtail Soup on YouTube,
But I think you'll
us.
find us, yeah. And we produce a weekly vlog on YouTube, which I think you've been referring to, which is about the daily life of the company, really. So it's anything from how we make the puppets to what's like when we're touring and all that, and everything in between. There is a full kind of the creation of Gulliver's Travels. We documented very thoroughly on there, so you can kind of see that from the very beginning, right up to the first performances. On Instagram, we're on there a lot. We tend to do a lot of Instagram stories. We post pictures of the puppets and things on there as well. Twitter, we're not very good at, but we try.
TikTok, just getting started.
Oh, and TikTok, Noel's trying.
Just trying
TikTok.
to get my head around TikTok.
And we're at Boxtail Soup there as well. That's right, isn't it?
It is,
Yeah.
I must admit, TikTok's one of the first social media things that come up that suddenly made me feel a lot older. So, so I did explain it sort of at the beginning, but I'm sure you'll be able to explain much better. So 2 very similar questions from Nanny Lynn Sindri and Soldier. It's a great name, easy to remember. How did you come about? How did it come about? So if you probably had to explain it much better than I did at the beginning, so if you can mention that, please.
Yeah, well, I mean, thank you for saying it's a great name. That's good to hear. It was one of those things that started out as a pun. It started out as a bit of a joke. When we started the company, it's quite difficult really to come up with a name, because you know that you don't have any experience of what you're creating, but you know that if you choose a name, then you're going to be stuck with it for quite some time if there's any success. So we kept talking about different names and coming back to different things. I'd said Boxtail Soup, I think, as some kind of joke at some point, because we talked about the idea of having these trunks and having the show come out of these boxes. And we just kept coming back to it. We would come up with a few other suggestions, and then we wouldn't be quite happy with them. We'd just keep coming back and going, it needs to sound something like Boxtail Soup. It needs to have that kind of rhythm, that kind of sound to it. And in the end, we just relented and said, you know what, we're just going to go with Boxtail Soup. So the idea, of course, is that the stories do come out of the trunks. So they're all transported in these vintage trunks. The tale obviously comes from the storytelling side of it. And the soup idea was really kind of makes sense in the idea that there's a lot of different things that go into it. You know, I came from a physical theatre and a circus background and street performing, and Antonia was classically trained, and we brought puppetry into the mix. So yeah, there's a lot of different elements to it. Make a lovely theatrical soup.
And also, before I get onto Hansel and Gretel, I really like the way your costumes have words written on them. Whose idea was to put the words on the costumes?
It's so difficult always to remember exactly who came up with things, and I honestly couldn't. I'm not sure. We had various design conversations towards the beginning. I remember saying to you when we were making Northanger that in terms of design, I felt like it needed to have something that tied everything together and made it feel like it was very much our show. And then we'd had this conversation of it maybe being interesting if it looked like the characters are kind of stepped through the pages of a book. And then we happened at the time to live in a flat above a woman who is a textile printer and designer. So we had a conversation with her and said, you know, could we make a fabric that's got text on it in some way? And she was like, yes, absolutely. So she was incredibly helpful, sat with us, we created the artwork, and the text is a mixture of, it's Northanger Abbey because that was the first book we adapted, and then it's got some Romeo and Juliet and some of the Tempest on it because they were the plays that Noel and I were doing when we met, so they mean something to us. And then we sort of created that the print with her. We worked out the configuration of those texts, and we made sure we picked versions of those books that had interesting fonts that would look interesting once they were printed. And then I went with her and we screen printed, so they're hand screen printed. And it's completely unique. It's our fabric, and nobody else has it, and it features in all of our shows in some form, either in the costumes or on the set or both. Yeah.
Very cool. I'll get Hansel and Gretel. Patricia's asked a question. I just want to get a Hansel and Gretel up, and I will ask your question, Patricia. Then asks, it's Hansel and Gretel at the exchange. That looks so much fun. It really does.
It's a lot of fun to do.
It is. It's a lot of fun.
Patricia says, as we've just getting into the last 7 minutes, what's your favourite tale to perform or have performed?
That's such a good question. They're all so different. Some of them are harder work than others. So, and I think that varies for each of us depending on so for me, The Tone of the Screw is one of the hardest to perform. I love doing it, but it's a bit of an emotional roller coaster and it's very intense. So it's difficult, but that doesn't mean I don't love it. And then, you know, something like Hansel and Gretel is huge fun. And it's so fun. We get the children involved and they're hilarious. So that's great fun. Christmas Carol is a lot of work. Again, it's like a proper workout because there's just so much going on, but there's magical moments in it. I don't know that I couldn't pick a favourite.
No. I honestly don't know where I'd begin if I did that.
Northanger Abbey is like an old friend, so whenever we come back to that one, we're like, this is such a lovely old friend of a show. So there are, because I think casting the runes is quite difficult for you in the same way for Turn the Screw for me, because it's very
Same
intense
kind of thing.
for you.
Yeah. It's a bit of a roller coaster. Once you start the show, then that character is on a pretty intense journey.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, I must admit, when I saw Casts and Runes, you know, and particularly the bit with there's a door scene in it, and it's probably one of the intense bits. I must admit, the hairs on the back of my neck were really standing up at that bit, so it was great. Wendy said, looks brilliant. Moira says, everything they produce is so magical. This is Patricia. Have you ever performed in a school? My daughter is convinced she's seen you in school. Probably useful because I was told the school by your daughter. But do you do like school performances, or is it somebody else just thinking of?
It's not something we often do, but occasionally.
We have.
Yeah.
We've done a handful as our company. But when Noel and I met, we were working for a theatre and education company. So we toured schools a lot then. I mean, that was a while ago, so I'm not sure that would make sense, but it might, depending on how old we do. But yes, we have done over the years. We've done a handful of performances in schools, and it tends to be we've done them for friends or for the occasional person who's seen us at the Fringe actually, and where we can tack them onto our theatre touring. So it's not impossible.
Yeah. Okay. And I realize there's just 4 minutes left, so we're coming to the end for now on this one. But one of the questions I want to ask, because you were asked before your favourite tales, have you got a favourite prop or puppet that you've created?
Oh, that's a good one as well. I always wanted to make a robin puppet and an owl puppet, and then I got to do both of those for for Hansel and Gretel. So I, have a little bit of a soft spot,
and you got to
particularly
make
for the robin.
a cupcake lantern.
I got
as
to
well.
make a cupcake lantern, yeah, which I designed for our Little Grim Tales and never got to make. And I do really love Little Gulliver. It's super cute.
Yeah, I think again the thing is you're always building on what you've done before. So for Krill, for example, because of this, the set had to be a little more ambitious. There were a few ideas that we came up with when we were just initially, throwing things out, that we weren't sure whether we'd be able to make a reality or not. And it was so satisfying to be able to realize some of those things and to have them work. So that's always great. It's always when you come up with an idea and you think, well, I don't know if anybody's done this. I don't know if this is feasible even. And then you can actually make it work. That's always incredibly satisfying.
Marley puppet. I do have a bit of a soft spot for that puppet as well. That
for Gulliver, there were a few ideas. The idea of this spinning orrery thing that we had for Laputa, and the collapsible thing of the anchors. Yeah, again, it's so immensely satisfying when you've created something like that. But then you're on to the next thing and you're coming up with ideas for something else.
And then I think we'll always have a soft spot for the very, very first puppets we ever made. So
I
don't know, it's difficult. I feel like they might be listening and they might get offended.
Yeah, all of them. Just say all of them, and
All of them.
yeah. Brilliant. Well, that's nearly finished. I'll just do a quick announcement on what's happening next week, and then give you a chance to just say social media and things again just before you go, and websites and everything. But next week, next Tuesday, we have Higgy Pop. So I go into that. You must know Higgy Pop and his Paranormal Awards. I was interviewed by him quite recently when he came to Bosworth Hall. So do check that one out. That's going to be really good. Quick shout out for your website again, if you would like to do that, and anything else.
Sure, yes. So the website is boxtailsoup.co.uk. You can find us on basically all the social media at boxtailsoup. And it's probably also worth mentioning that as well as Christmas Carol and Hansel and Gretel at the Exchange in Twickenham on the 2nd and 3rd of December, the online version of Gulliver will be available sometime early in the new year, probably February, March. So keep an eye on our website if you'd be interested in seeing that. And then it's also worth mentioning, especially on a program like this, that we are returning to casting the rooms, in fact. So we'll be revisiting and reinvigorating casting the rooms, ready to take that on tour next year. So again, keep an eye on the website if you would be interested in seeing that show.
That's really pleased me. Thank you. Excellent. So yeah, Soldier says thank you guys. Carol says thanks for sharing your stories with us tonight. And there's a few more questions coming in, but we have run out of time unfortunately. But thank you so much for tonight, agreeing to be on here and sharing what you do with us, and it's been an absolute joy. So thank you, whatever you're doing, everybody. Hope you have a lovely evening. If it's daytime, have an outstanding day for you wherever you are. Thank you, and I'll see you again and my guest next week. Bye everyone.